You're listening to Digi City, a cyberpunk story in 8 parts. Written by Jarrett Rush and produced by SciFi in cooperation with the author. Part 2. Miller watched the morning brighten from the roof of his apartment building, just like he had a half-dozen mornings in the last few weeks, ever since crews started sending him into hothouses to chase down runners. A questionable number of empties littered the ground by his feet. Dock workers coming back to the job after a weekend off shouted hellos to each other. The bell above the door to Molly's diner announced the arrival of another customer, and the smell of bacon made its way to Miller's nose. Half a dozen birds caused a wire above Miller's head to sag as they sang their good mornings to the new day. He gathered up the bottles and walked to the edge of the roof. He lined them up on the ledge, then pushed them over one by one, watching them tumble 10 stories before landing in the trash bin below. Engines revved out by the water as a construction crew fired up the heavy machinery needed to finish repairs to the docks destroyed in the explosions a few months earlier. These workers fixing the docks were doing their part to rebuild New Eden, Miller thought as he watched them get prepared for another day. Working for Roma and tracking down runners, Miller was doing his. Crews had been happy to see him last night. Miller even got a smile, but by the time he left crews in the runner, it was well after midnight, and he didn't want to wake Carrie and the baby. So he grabbed a 6-pack of Roma's Best and headed for the roof to watch the morning rise. He tried to be quiet when slipping the key into the lock after heading downstairs, but his compromised coordination made that impossible. Shh. It was Carrie. She was in the kitchen holding the baby. Sorry, Miller whispered back. She awake? Yeah, Carrie said. Most of the night. She ran a bottle under hot water. Oh, just like her dad, Miller said and slapped his wife on the backside. And her mom. She stared at the bottle. Silence for a moment. There's dinner in the fridge. Miller opened the door and pulled out a foil-covered plate. He took it to the living room and sat it on the coffee table, then went back to the kitchen. Carrie finished prepping the bottle. Let me take her, he said. You go sleep. She shook him off. You need to eat. Carrie followed him back to the living room, sat in the chair opposite him, and started to feed the baby. She was born just a few weeks after the explosions. They'd named her Hope, since that's what everyone seemed to need at that time. Miller dug into 2 thick slices of meatloaf with a crispy ketchup topping. Heat that up, Carrie said. Miller shook his head and dug back in for another bite. I like it this way. You seen Chris today? Carrie looked down at Hope and shook her head. He may have been in and out of here and I didn't realize it, but I doubt it. End of the day, though, I'm not his mom. It's not my job to know where your brother is. Miller sighed. I know you're not, I just didn't know if you'd seen him. Miller finished the last couple of bites on his plate, then took it to the kitchen. He returned, took Hope, and sat down next to Carrie. He rocked gently back and forth, and looked down into Hope's curious eyes. Carrie stood and kissed Miller on the forehead. I'm going to sleep for a bit. Miller nodded. Once she's asleep, I'll come lay her down. Then I'm going to go see if I can find Chris. Okay, Carrie said. She was standing in the doorway to the bedroom. Just be careful. Miller cradled Hope close to his chest and held her tightly. He talked to her. He sang. Her eyes grew heavy. He eased himself to standing and took gentle steps to his darkened bedroom. He paused a moment at the door and let his eyes adjust before proceeding. He pulled Hope close to his face, kissed her forehead, then gently laid her in the bassinet. He closed the door to the room quietly behind him. Light was trying to fight its way through the living room curtains. He went back to the kitchen and pulled a box from on top of the refrigerator. He placed it on the cabinet, opened the lid, and pulled the gun from inside. He pushed it into his waistband and headed for the front door. He needed a piece that couldn't be traced back to him. He was going to look for Chris. He was starting at Tallboy.